everyone, and welcome to Incorruptible Mass. We are here to help us all transform state politics. We know that together we can make the policies here in the state of Massachusetts reflect the needs of the vast majority of the residents of our beautiful state. So today, we have an exciting podcast about education, about the Thrive Act, and a wonderful guest who is with us, Vatsady Sivongxay. And she will be talking about not only the Thrive Act in terms of our educational system, but also its momentum, the impact that it will have, who it is that is being impacted by our current way of having receiverships in schools, in school districts. We'll talk about some places where this kind of receivership is truly a disaster and everybody knows it's a disaster. We'll talk a little bit about the MCAS, and then we'll talk briefly as well about the ballot measure that is related. But before we do any of that, I would love to introduce my two illustrious co-hosts. I will begin with Jordan Berg-Powers.
Jordan Berg-Powers, he, him. I'm coming from Worcester, Massachusetts. And for this purpose, I've had several kids in the public school system. I currently have a 10-year-old in the public school system.
And Jonathan Cohn.
Jonathan Cohn, he, him, his, joining from Boston. And have been involved in issuing electoral campaigns kind of in Boston and statewide for kind of about a decade now, which is wild. And happy to have Vatsady with us today. But Anna, I'll let you do.
Thank you. Anna Callahan, she, her, coming at you from Medford. And I also have a kid who is in the public school system here in Medford. And love talking about all this policy stuff with everybody every week. So much fun. So, Vatsady, I would love it if you could introduce yourself and your organization first, and then we'll get on to talking about the Thrive Act.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Anna, Jordan, and John, for having me on. My name is Vatsady Sivongxay. I go by the She, Her series. I also have an awesome young person in public schools, and he loves it. And I love our public school here in Cambridge. I am the director of the Massachusetts Education and Justice Alliance, as folks might hear. We also go by MAJA, and we're a coalition, a statewide coalition of organizations led by community members, students, parents, and union workers as well. And we work together to improve our public schools, K through college, so kindergarten through college, and we fight in order to get the resources and funds to our public schools so all of our students can succeed and thrive.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's exciting work that you guys are doing. Can you introduce us to the Thrive Act, how long it's been around? I mean, I guess first, just what is it? What does it do? What problems is it trying to solve?
The Thrive Act has been extremely exciting piece of legislation that is brand new. This is our first year into a legislative cycle, and it really gives us, the community, an opportunity to change the system for assessment and accountability of our schools. We all know that the state has failed to better improve our schools and to bring our voices into the decision-making process. So the Thrive Act gives us that channel to improve through changes in policy to ensure that our students and our schools are better, that all students, no matter where they come from or what type of background they come from, that they succeed and thrive. So there's like 4 big changes that our Thrive Act pushes for. And the first one is like a comprehensive vision of the future of all of our public schools, it based on like authentic evidence-based assessment system that actually supports our students. And then, as I mentioned, really, driving these decisions about how to best support our students in schools through a more democratic and community-driven process. And then also, it changes the graduation requirement. So we're one of 7 states left that requires the MCAS or standardized testing as a graduation requirement. And it ends all existing state takeover, the receivership of schools within a year. So like Lawrence, Holyoke, Southbridge would have a more democratic governance of their schools and better control of their school systems in order to, really build a better education space for all of our students, families, and educators and staff.
Amazing. Can you give us a little information? Like, how long has the Thrive Act been around? And
Yeah,
little bit more logistical information.
Yeah, officially, right? We filed, I believe it was in January. It might have been early February. But so this year, 2023, it was officially filed. There has been such great momentum in partnerships among all sorts of organizations, from grassroots to advocacy to like policy making organizations, and it's growing. It continues to grow both at statewide organizations and local organizations. And the momentum that we've seen in our grassroots organizing has been what keeps us going, right? The energy from like the students, the parents, the educators, and education staff has been quite amazing. And so, it's a new legislation, and the momentum continues to today. And so our partner organizations that help lead the work has been working tirelessly every day to, reflect, to hear from the communities, to move forward together. And so we're all excited to share more a little bit about the Thrive Act.
Quick thing that I wanted to pop in. So when you were talking about the bill, you mentioned several different communities across the state and the governance of their schools. Can you explain to people a little bit more what is the current governance situation of their schools that the Thrive Act would fix?
And what receivership means?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good place to take a step back. So when a receivership is the state takeover of an entire school district, and you might have, or individual schools, but in this case we're looking at the entire school district. So the 3 districts that I mentioned are Lawrence, Holyoke, and Southbridge. And Lawrence is going on almost 13 years of being under state control. And state control pretty much means the state makes the ultimate decision to take over the school district by controlling, acting as like the superintendent. So removing the superintendent, sometimes like removing the power of an elected school committee, like in Lawrence. The state has control of what part of the school district they take over. So it may be different in each district, right? And who or what they replace it with. So they can replace it with one person, they can replace it with a nonprofit. And in almost all of these situations, they've been folks and organizations that have no connections to the community and no understanding of what has happened or what needs on how to move things to improve the schools. Now, if we look at a unique situation, which is Springfield, they call the state takeover empowerment zone. And that's like carving out part of the district and saying you will be under state control and like won't have any power, whereas the other parts of the state, the other part of the district will. So it creates like, 2 different school system, and it's really confusing for parents, right? Like super confusing for the parents who are BIPOC and immigrant, low income, who, we consider like are the majority of the population and families here in these districts.
Yeah. Jordan, I know we were talking about this before, and you have a lot of thoughts about how to sort of explain the fact that, wow, what a surprise that these districts that are under state control are people of color. So I would
Yeah,
love
I mean, it's
to hear you talk about that.
fundamentally the receivership laws are racist. They're not going to ever put Arlington under receivership. They're not ever going to put they're not ever going to put any of the sort of white towns into receivership. And again, because I think the other piece that we haven't talked about, but we will, is just that it's what the reasons for receivership are random and not universal and hard to suss out. And so if you could put Brookline under receivership for the treatment of its Black teachers that have like complained, or the fact that there's a disparate impact for students of color versus white students, right? But they will never do that, because fundamentally this law is a law that rests on the idea that Black and brown people are and poor people are too stupid to run things, and you need this these magical beings who are objective, Q white man, and have no sort of ideological leanings that will color their belief systems. Q white men.
They don't come from the community.
Right,
Yeah.
who won't be bogged down by the histories of corruption and problems, right? It's always this idea. It's this idea that there are these people out there who can be free of any subjectiveness or any lived experience, that can then come in and just fix these problems, which are systematic problems, often reflecting our disinvestment and lack of care for communities that are underprivileged and under-resourced, right? So like that's fundamentally, they are always about taking, and I think the most important thing is receivership is just a fancy word for authoritarian dictatorial takeover of democratic control. That may take forms in lots of different ways, but fundamentally what you're saying is this thing that we take for granted in the more affluent, more privileged parts of the state, where I get a say on what happens in my child's school and the district that my school resides in, you don't get that anymore. You get some other formation of it, but you can't be trusted to do it yourselves, right? And so that's fundamentally what this system does. Its impact is Black and brown communities almost exclusively, definitely poor communities, and it only exists. You cannot understand it unless you understand systematic racism, because nobody would, like, this would never go in right, like they're not going to do it in Georgetown, right? Like this would just never happen to other districts like this. And so I think that that's an important way to think about this, about the receivership.
Yeah, I want us to talk a little bit about a couple of other communities that are outside of Massachusetts. And I think people in Massachusetts, we tend to think, oh, our state is so much better than other states. And it drives people to donate to politics in other states. It drives people to volunteer for other states. Even people that I know, family members of mine who live in other states, they're like, you're wasting your time doing politics in Massachusetts. You guys already have it good. Isn't your stuff fine? Isn't your stuff great? So like, I want us to take just a moment to like talk about a couple of other cities where they have taken over, the state has taken over, and we think it's horrible in Massachusetts. We're like, the Republicans are done undemocratically, blah, 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 because of people of color, And then let us reflect that, no, in Massachusetts, we are doing this too. So if we can talk about Flint, Michigan first, which is kind of a broad, more of a broad example.
Yeah, I'll just go really quickly to just remind people that the crisis of water in Flint, Michigan was when their city got taken over by their Republican governor and put under a receivership or a city emergency manager. We can call it's just euphemisms for took away local democratic control and let it be run by undemocratic people. That receiver decided to divert where the water was coming from a safe, reliable place to a better connected, cheaper place that ultimately poisoned the citizens of Detroit, Michigan. That literally is what happened. And that's what's happening with our schools. I think when we talk about impact, the other thing I want to talk about is like, what happens to school districts that go underneath these things? you're taking out teachers who are, if they don't leave on their own, they're probably going to get pushed out, who have been there for a long time, who have a lot of like experience, and you're literally poisoning these children with MCAS, because what becomes the focus? MCAS prep, math, science. Math reading, but not math to learn how to do math well, not math for a love of math, not math for a lifelong appreciation of math to do well on the MCAS, and that's it. Drill. It's not, you're not teaching kids to think for themselves. You're not teaching kids to be good citizens. You're teaching kids to sit down, shut up, listen, never move, never think critically, fill in bubbles for answers to questions that have already been answered, right? Like that, you're teaching kids to be rote memorization vessels. And that's what happens, right? So it's a different, we think of it, Flint, Michigan's so visceral because the kids were being poisoned, but there's a real poisoning happening to our children's future with these takeovers. It's not just that people lose democratic control and it's racist. It's also like what happens in these school districts.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I want to mention here, because the absolute basis for the differences that we see in different school districts is the fact that in America, we have this absurd way of paying for schooling, for public schooling, which is tied to property values. So is anybody surprised that like wealthier communities have, schools that are better, since they're better funded, they have kids who do better on, whatever kind of tests you give to them? Like it is set up to, the whole system is set up to ensure that the communities that are poor and have more people of color cannot pass whatever the vague, bizarre test is for receivership. And then they go into receivership. Like it is systemically, it is set up to make these things happen because of the crazy way that we fund public schooling, which is just, I think, criminal. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Which there, and it's a step beyond that as well, because it's not just that the kind of how that connects to the funding base for the school, but when you do have the fact of that, let's say in an affluent area, the parents often have more time to invest into the school. There are more times, like they have more money to invest in other aspects of the child's education. You tend to have greater, let's say, children often have greater housing stability in an affluent community as opposed to more on food security, lower rates of gun violence, and all of those things that like quick fixes in a school system fundamentally can't solve. And that the kind of the refusal that often in a lot of education reform strategies to look at what's existing outside of children is often something that creates a pathway toward privatization strategies, because you can kind of present any idea as a quick fix that your friend with this, who you can give a lucrative contract to, will be able to solve the problems facing the school district if we only do X. Whereas they make a lot of money, but you haven't solved any of the underlying issues that are causing problems for the district.
Yeah, other cities that have.
Well, let's Vatsady.
Yeah, I was sticking with this and also looking at the impact, right, of state takeover and receivership, and this cycle that state takeover puts our Black and Brown and immigrant populations in, is that even when you look outside of Massachusetts, when the state takes over, right, it's the same demographics, the same people, right? You look at Louisiana, when the governor gave away all the schools, right, to charter schools. That was huge privatization. Now in Massachusetts, when there's a real opportunity because of the Student Opportunity Act funds going into our schools and providing those resources and funds, who's trying to take the money? Like folks who are not from the community, potentially nonprofits that we have no clue, where they're coming from, who's running it, right? We have no decisions on like how much they're getting paid, the metrics, the goal setting for the leadership of the state takeover team. Our teachers are put in a place where, they're under immense pressure to meet an unidentified goal.
Mhm.
Like there's no goals. So how are our teachers supposed to like, improve and share and create curriculum with students and families and report back to families and talk with them, right? When it's like no clear goals of how, where they need to be, like as a district. And it's not a system that is for our communities, for our students, and for our families. It doesn't bring in like enough funds to like improve, right? It does for sure if we look at the record, like as Jordan said, high turnover of teachers, right? We don't have like black and brown teachers and staff that can really relate to our students in these districts. They don't feel welcomed. And I wonder why, because, even if they are from the community, they want to give back to the community, they're being pushed out. And then our students are with teachers who might really be new. So it's like, it creates a system where everyone has more challenges than before. And that's not right.
Yeah. I want to bring in one other example from another city in another state, Houston, Texas. If somebody wants to go ahead and give us a little bit of background of what happened in Houston, the schools there.
Yeah, I think Vatsady, you should talk. You might know a little bit more about but as I understand it, exact similar situation. The Republicans gave themselves the ability to come into districts and take out the Democratic representation and put in whoever they want.
Small d Democratic.
Small d, right. They targeted the largest district that happens to, again, be mostly Black and brown parents. They sent in somebody who they got rid of the elected officials and sent in one person who's politically connected, who literally has no background in education and has no higher degrees in it, like there just happens to be well connected to the governor as a Republican. And so that person's now running the largest school district in Texas. And similarly, I think to Massachusetts, for no reason. We don't know what their goal is. What will they accomplish except vague, be less Black and brownie? Like, it's just like, that's seemingly always the metric. And so, I think it's a really good, there was a lot of outrage on it. I saw a lot of things on the TV about it. There was a woman who spoke up and was basically just went to it. It was like, you don't even matter. Like, you're just here for political things. You're going to leave. And I think it's, again, a reminder that when we see these things in Republican states in Texas and so forth, and people get outraged and they're on cable news, those are happening here. That literally is happening here. The exact same scenario is happening here. And the state, were it not for a lot of pressure, was going to do that to our largest school district for the exact same reasons that it happens to be run by Black and brown folks and people of color.
Yeah, and that person is like really touting that like they're ready to replace their principals, they're ready to like bring outside operators into the district to to improve the schools. And it's like, we understand that you're doing exactly what privatizers have done to public schools, but like, can you share with us what the benchmarks are? What are your benchmarks to your goals, and what are your goals, right? Like, don't just tell us what has failed in the past. Like, clearly, you don't understand, and really should go back to doing some studies and better understanding of what the community of Houston needs, right? But it's like, I think it's sickening that he's just extremely excited to do all of this and very public about it, right? So like, this is the type of people that like take over the schools. They're like, yeah, we're coming in, we're going to replace you all, and we're going to bring outsiders in. Like, who says that in any situation? Like, how about if that happened to our court systems? Like, we're gonna replace all the judges, guys.
And
you
judges,
say
those
about
people weren't even elected. They were appointed most of the time,
Yeah,
right?
they were
So
all
we're
appointed
actually
anyway.
not even talking about democracy, right? We're actually saying
Right.
like, hey, actually, we're going to just take all your city councilors and throw them all out, and we're putting our own people that, happen to be our
Friends.
political allies,
Yeah.
our cronies.
Yeah.
Can you say about who the person is? Can you just talk a little bit about the background about who you're talking about and what the plan, like what they said, who they like, who are we talking about in this case?
So I think what's interesting is his his name is very catchy. It's Mike Miles. And so he will be the state appointed superintendent of Houston, and he is definitely doesn't have the qualification, similarly to other organizations and individuals that are appointed to take care of and run entire districts. So in some cases, like what I'm emphasizing, in some cases, it's a unilateral decision from the top at the state level, and then like given like few people or one person the full authority. So your city council doesn't have it, your school committee definitely doesn't have a say, whether elected or appointed. And in some cases, like your mayor doesn't have a say. Like, and because it can change from district to district, immigrant folks talk, people of color talk, right? Some people better understand through conversation, and it's incomprehensible for a person to like understand, okay, so how do I better improve the system? First, I don't even know what the system is. Like, who do I go to? Who is a person I go to one, understand how this works, and then two, to then advocate and ensure that like our perspective and our voices are part of the decision making. It's the complexity is it makes it very undemocratic. Yeah.
So if you're hearing us about how these things happen in other states, Republicans do these horrible things that we're offended by, that we think are terrible, and we are going to donate our money to other states, we're going to volunteer in other states, you need to hear what we're saying, which is these things are happening in Massachusetts. If you have heard what we said today, that what happens in Massachusetts matters as much as what happens in some faraway state, you need to donate right now, $5, just to tell us that you're listening. Donate $5. The link is below. It's very easy. Put that $5 in to show that you have heard what we say on this podcast, which is we are not this wonderful, perfect, progressive state, that our state legislature is failing us in many, many ways. If you've heard what we have to say, give us $5.
And I just want to say really quickly that like one of the things I love is that this conversation isn't happening in other places. You're not getting 30+ minutes diving into the understanding of one policy and how it will interact with our schools. We'll be lucky if they cover it for 2 or 3 paragraphs and then never talk about it again. But they will definitely talk endlessly about who's up, who's down, who's for, who's against, right? They'll talk endlessly how it affects the governor, doesn't affect them, but won't talk about the policy itself. And so if you want to have real conversations about real policies, and that's exactly as Anna said, like donate, and just know that again, it goes to all the people you don't see. None of us take a cent of that. It goes to a bunch of people who we pay, a bunch of young people, artists, to do some of the stuff behind the scenes to make this happen.
Great. I would love for us to talk a little bit more deeply about the MCAS. And Vatsady, if you want to start us off and tell us a little bit about the MCAS and how it works, just for folks maybe who don't have kids in the public schools and maybe don't know quite as much.
Yeah. key part of the Thrive Act is ending the MCAS as a graduation requirement. As I mentioned in the intro, we're one of the last states that require this type of graduation requirement. And it particularly impacts, again, Black and Brown students, low income, and immigrant students, right? They have to pass the high school, the MCAS in 10th grade to pass, to receive their diploma. And it just doesn't make sense. I mean, I think for me, I didn't have to take the tests. I think I came out pretty okay. At least my parents are very happy with where I'm at. I feel like I'm contributing back to the community. And the biggest thing about MCAS is that it doesn't give, it's extremely stressful for students and educators to ensure that students pass it. It doesn't provide the metrics for our schools and educators to support the students, because the data is given way after the student has left. So it doesn't serve its purpose to support students.
Yeah. What does MCAS stand for?
So I try not to know too much about the acronym of MCAS, but let me make sure I get it right. Jordan, you can feel free to jump in, because I know that.
I'm looking it up. Yeah. I've always heard it. It is the Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System. And clearly by the name, it must be a very comprehensive, well-rounded test that gives all of the information that you need to know about students and all aspects of their education, right?
Yeah. To whom, I guess. This assessment system gives some data to someone, but not to the folks who need it, right? Not to the students or the parents, so that they can see where the students are at in a timely, urgent way, and to the educators who are there to build the curriculum together to support the students. The MCAS, is an assessment system, right? Could be used as a benchmark, but it just doesn't function the way that folks have intended it to be. And I think that, we're one of the last states to really see the true outcome of what an MCAS system does. So
yeah,
right. And it's just been, I think that we're hearing a lot from even parents, when we go out and discuss what is the MCAS, a lot of parents don't know what it is, right? We say, oh, it tests on English and math, and folks are like, what is the test? And then it takes how many, I don't know, weeks and months to explain exactly what it is. And parents don't have time for that. They just need to know, what is it telling us? How can we better improve? How can I be more involved in my students? How can I work with my teachers to ensure that my student and the and their class does well? And it doesn't do that at all.
And I think
Jordan,
a lot of the complaints that that people have about the MCAS is that this is not teaching kids to think, right? It's not teaching children to be creative problem solvers. It's not helping them in their future lives. And I know, Jordan, you have a wonderful prop for us in a story, so we would love to pull that in.
I think there's a couple of things I want to tease out from the MCAS. The first is just that, even so, for people who don't understand what Vatsady's saying, I just want to reiterate what Vatsady's saying. You get the scores after your students are gone. So if you wanted to assess how your students are doing, they're now gone, and you can't use it as a tool to figure out where they are. But even if you gave it in the beginning of the year and got immediate feedback on where they are, it's still a bad test, because it's geared towards, it is fundamentally geared towards white students. There's a lot of studies about this. When the MCAS was first introduced, there were 3 sort of companies that could have been the test behind it. And we chose the test that correlated the most to race. I want to say that again. We had 3 tests that were possible. We bought the test that was most correlated to race. And the people who wrote the test at the time said it was not meant to be a standardized test for all students on graduation. They have now changed their tune because they're getting very rich off of it. But when they first created that assessment, they were very clear that it was a base assessment tool for teachers to get a sense of where their students were. And the reason for that is if you ask somebody a question about a sofa and they've never heard that word because they use the word couch, you are fundamentally making a determination that seems objective, but is actually based on your privileged perspective. And we see that over and over again. You know, one of my favorite, one of the easiest examples, one of my friends grew up in a communist country. And like when they did math, right, they would always, even their math questions, like what do we ask questions about? Like if somebody sells something, if somebody takes something away, what do we have? Like their questions were all about like, you know, what happens when we come together? What happens when people do things? Like even our math questions can be put together in such a way that they reflect back our own biases. And that's without the fact that the MCAS does not make appropriate limitation for people who have learning, who are neurodivergent, and it does not make it for people whose English is not their first language, right? So if you take into effect all of those things, even if we moved it to time it in the right time, it's not doing what parents and people think it's doing. The only thing the MCAS correlates to is family wealth. That's it. That's the only thing it can tell you. There are much cheaper ways to find out where poor people live. We don't need the MCAS to do that.
In fact, we already do.
And that's all it does, because a lot of times parents get the illusion of information, but it's not information. I think that's really important for people. It is not information. It's just telling you where poor people are. It's not giving you any information about education, and we need to disavow ourselves of that belief. But what is it doing in practice? What it does in practice is it crowds out other education, to what Anna's saying. So I always have this prop. This is a reminder. My daughter in kindergarten, this is the second of these books. It's 2. Look how thick, that's math. Math. What did you do in kindergarten? Parents do not understand fully how much MCAS is ruining their children's future. I promise you, whatever you think about the MCAS, you do not understand. Politicians have no idea what's going on in the classroom, which is why they should never be allowed to legislate about what happens in the classroom. It's literally like all these men legislating about abortion. That's what every politician in Beacon Hill is doing when it comes to education. They have no idea what's happening in a classroom. This is what's happening. Kindergarten. I want people to get a sense, for people who are listening, it's a big, thick book. It's a workbook. And I love math. I mean, I love math.
Me too. I was a math major, man. Math is my favorite subject.
I promise you, when you go into this book, it is not written by people who understand math. It's not written by people. It's not age appropriate. It's not even logical. It's literally, a lot of times, it's nonsense, because they have to sell, they want to sell this to school districts. So they put nonsense in here to just fill pages. I guarantee you it's written by like college students, people who they're paying minimum wage to just fill pages, fill content, because they got to read. They give you new books every year, even to the same class. They want to read. They don't want you to use the old ones. They want you to sell. And so what's happening is it's crowding out other education, especially for Black and brown children. My child gets civics 1 day a week. Her civics is treated like art. It's treated like gym. It's treated like, she gets science once a week. She gets civics once a week, and she gets like memorization of math and reading every single day, almost the entirety of her day. That is what's happening in our schools. It is really, really bad. And I think that we don't really appreciate how bad it is, how much it's crowding out. And that's why teachers are screaming to us, do something about this. This is taking away what we think education is. There is not one teacher I have ever talked to who has said, yep, this makes sense. This is what we should do it. Not one. No, there's not a single professional who studies how children learn, who says the thing you need to do is have them memorize information that they can fill out on a standardized test. Not
At
one.
5
There's
years
not one.
old.
There's
At
5 years old. Right. At 5 years old. Not one. Not a single one. But that's what we're doing right now to our students, rather than listening to professionals about what we could and should be doing.
Yeah. I'm gonna, we're gonna have to close up soon. We have an amazing, this is such a great conversation. I know we would love to talk about this for a long time.
Piece about the, really quickly, I'd love Vatsady to talk about the piece that does, like, it's, people are always worried about, like, what happens after MCAS. I would love, because this bill thinks about that. The Thrive Act thinks about this other piece. Like, what is, you know, so I think there's some really, the good news is that teachers have thought about this and the professionals have thought about this.
So Jordan, I think what you're asking is like, what is the alternative to the graduation, to the MCAS? Yeah, it's definitely like, it still meets, you know, the MCAS will still be taken, right? Because I think one of the questions is that, does it completely get rid of the MCAS? And the Thrive Act doesn't, you know, we would still meet federal requirements. So we would still receive federal funds. Like, this is a whole system thing, right? Like, and then what the option is that the district would have an opportunity to really like look at coursework and really see, you know, how the student is doing based on the coursework and meeting the standards that is required for passing for that coursework. So instead of just relying on the MCAS as a graduation requirement for everyone, right? Even for a person who just came to the US and in the 3rd year, right? And they've only been here for 8, 9, and 10th grade. There's an alternative, and we can see, you know, their improvement and their real understanding of the curriculum and the learning. So not just like they're, you know, just not just memorizing, as Jordan said, but application of the.
It also has a way to replace the MCAS, just really quickly. It also has for us to find an assessment that actually works for students.
Right, the commission study, right? So there's it allows us to, the Thrive Act pushes for a commission to look at what are the other possible assessment system that is way better than MCAS, right? And it allows us to bring in a more diverse group of organizations that can help look at the current assessment system, new assessment possibilities, and then really think about what is the best path forward versus just like, hey, let's just go ahead and like grab one of these 3 because, you know, we have good relationships with this company, right? Like that's not the best way to make any type of management decision. So let's just do like the real work,
especially about kids.
Yeah,
make our decisions about kids based on which companies we're friends with.
Right. No, let's not do that.
Wonderful. Jonathan, I am gonna have you give us just a quick sentence or two about the related ballot measure, just so we kind of understand how these two ideas are related to each other.
Yep. So we've kind of, so one, thank you to Vatsady again. Vatsady and the group of us have talked about the different components of the bill called the Thrive Act. One part of them probably sounded familiar to people who are listeners, if you listened to our episode from last week around ballot measures, that the one part of the bill about the kind of eliminating the MCAS graduation requirement and replacing it with standards based on coursework, that had been filed by the Mass Teacher Association as a ballot initiative for next year's ballot. And so that's something that folks will probably end up hearing more about soon. We'll see, like, ballot initiatives have their own trajectory where there'll be signature collection happening for them in the fall, and then a whole timeline after that. But really appreciate Vatsady kind of being on here today to talk about all of the different parts of that bill as it moves forward for the session.
Wonderful. And Vatsady, I would love to just give you the final word on the show here. Is there anything that people can do to get involved? You know, what do you recommend to people who are interested in making sure that that we get this better outcome for our students?
Yeah, definitely stay tuned for, if you want to quickly connect with one of our partners or Meja, you can email us at info@mass@justice.org and we can connect you with the right partner that's like working on it. There is going to be a hearing on the Thrive Act coming up. So we'd love your support. We'd love to hear also your stories and amplify the stories. So please connect with us, connect with us at info@mass@justice.org.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to everyone here, Vatsady, to you, to Meja, and also to everyone listening today. Thank you so much. We cannot wait to talk with you all next week.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey there. Thanks so much for watching us on YouTube. Please like and subscribe. And it would be amazing if you would also subscribe to us on your favorite podcast player. Just look for Incorruptible Massachusetts wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much.